Welcome to the Kaplan Orchid Conservatory at Old Dominion University. We are a public display facility combining research as well as aesthetic beauty, focusing on the orchid family. We also have a great array of tropical plants from all over the world in order to showcase the diversity of the plant kingdom in the tropics. We are focusing primarily on orchids in our collections because they are one of the most diverse groups of plants in the world. Currently, the numbers are about 30,000 species worldwide, and they occur on every continent except Antarctica. They grow in the ground terrestrially, they grow on rocks, and they also grow on trees in the tropics. They have filled just about every ecological niche possible. They even grow in stream beds in the deserts, which is quite amazing. They also can emerge from permafrost for a few brief months in the summer. So orchids have definitely covered every possible adaptation. The one thing that makes orchids so special is their floral structure, and this is what has fascinated people for centuries. Primarily their lip, which has adapted to attract and accommodate pollinators to ensure pollination. And I will show you a classic orchid right now just to demonstrate this. Okay, this is a Cattleya orchid. It's from South America. And it is a classic shaped orchid, easily recognizable. Orchids have parts in threes. If you look at the back, these three parts here are sepals, three sepals. And in the front, you have 1, 2, 3 petals. And one petal is modified into what is called a lip or a labellum. And this is the main attraction to a pollinator. In this case, you have a nice big heavy lip. And this accommodates a bee that will come in to pollinate this flower. You also see lines in the lip and different colors. That also helps guide the bee into this flower for pollination. This particular group of flowers is also extremely fragrant. They smell really beautiful. But not all orchids smell beautiful. They can have all different types of fragrances. They can smell oily, waxy, fruity. They can smell like yeast. Some of them even smell like dung or rotting meat. And it's all about attracting their pollinator. And we'll talk a little bit more specifically about those later. I'll talk about other orchids in this Cattleya group just to show you within certain groups how diverse they are. This is a cousin, believe it or not, to the Cattleya called Brassavola nodosa. Now you see it's a white flower and there's no fragrance right now, but at nighttime the fragrance is amazing. It smells to some like Chanel No. 5. So if you came into this conservatory at night, this entire conservatory would be perfumed. Why is that? Well, the flower is white, so it shows up at nighttime. And it's long and tubular. This is to attract and accommodate a moth, which is the primary pollinator for this orchid. The same group with Cattleya, looks a little bit more like a Cattleya, is Rhyncholalia Digbyana fimbriana, and this is from, again, New World, Central South America. This orchid's lip is heavily fringed and frilled. This is to deter certain pollinators. They only want a certain type of bee to visit this flower, and this fringe apparently helps them keep other non-wanted pollinators out of their flower. This is also a night pollinated flower. Bees will come in early evening, but you also can get other insects visiting at night because it is very fragrant at night. Another orchid in the Cattleya group is Encyclia, and in this case you can see these lines that actually simulate a runway. You could say a landing strip for an insect pollinator to come in and be guided right into the center of the flower in order to ensure pollen transfer. Now, Encyclia is interesting to us here in the United States because there's only a handful of tropical orchids in extreme southern Florida that grow in the United States, and this is one of them. This is Encyclia tampens, and it grows around Tampa. That's its northern range, all the way down into the Everglades. Of course, it occurs further into the tropics, but this is one of the few purely tropical orchids that grows on a tree epiphytically that occurs in the continental United States. This is Prosthetia cochleata, known as the cockleshell orchid, or to some the octopus orchid, for obvious reasons. And this flower is interesting because most orchids in bud will twist their buds around so that the lip is down. In the case of this plant and this flower, it doesn't twist, so this is the lip right here, it's upright. And this again is to accommodate a specific pollinator. A large group in the New World tropics is Oncidium, also called the dancing lady orchid. They usually occur on long stems, and each little flower to some looks like, say, a flamenco dancer with a little skirt, arms, and maybe a headdress coming up. However, in nature, it is said to resemble a swarm of bees. So when a male bee comes along who is territorial, he will see this bouncing around and think it's a swarm of bees and will actually come in to attack the flowers. And while he is attacking the flowers, the pollen is transferred to his back or his head. He flies around, and apparently insects have very short memories. He sees another spray of dancing lady orchids and goes and attacks those flowers, and pollen is transferred. So orchids have actually taken advantage of the fact, apparently, that insects have very, very short memories. So it's very good for them to do this. Brassica occurs in the Caribbean down into Central and South America. Some people call it the mantis orchids because the flower does resemble a big mantis. However, if you look in the center there, it resembles a little bee, and there is a wasp that attacks this flower and fights with what they think is another insect, and in so doing, pollen is transferred to that wasp's head. Then it goes and flies around again and finds another flower, thinks it's another insect to attack, and pollen is transferred during this altercation. Another unique lip adaptation that orchids have assumed is the slipper orchid shape. Slipper orchids occur in both the Old World and the New World. And this specimen in particular is from the New World. This is from South America. It's called Phragmipedium. Now, the lip is right here. So here's your 3 petals with the 3rd as the lip. This lip momentarily traps an insect. They are attracted to this area right here, which is somewhat slippery, and it falls down into this pouch-shaped lip. It bumbles around. It's very difficult for it to fly straight back out, so it actually has to go up through the back of the flower. There are little ridges on the back of this lip that allow the insect to climb out like a ladder. When it does that, it comes out here, comes into contact with the pollen bundles, and it's attached to its back. So then this insect, in this case it would be a hoverfly, flies around, sees another flower, and again, they're short memories. They go in there and transfer pollen when they come out. Now, the interesting thing about this flower too is, why does the hoverfly find this orchid attractive? All these little spots right here inside the lip, to an insect resembles a colony of aphids. Hoverflies lay their eggs in aphid colonies, so when the babies hatch out, they have something to eat. This orchid has not only adapted a way to momentarily trap the hoverfly, but this is the attraction right here. It is actually mimicking a colony of aphids. Isn't that amazing? And pretty much the same, very similar structure. And it too is pollinated by hoverflies. You see all these spots here. But this particular species has developed all these little hairy spots to also resemble insects to help draw in the hoverfly pollinator. Just above it, we have a very strange orchid. This is called the butterfly orchid, primarily from Trinidad and parts of South America. And indeed, it does look like a butterfly. Butterflies are said to visit this flower. However, its main pollinator is a wasp or a hornet, because this little central part right here, the column that presents the pollen bundles, resembles a little bee if you look at it closely. So this wasp or hornet will attack this flower thinking there's a bee there encroaching on its territory. Now while it's fighting with what it thinks is a bee, the pollen is detached from this flower to that bee. The bee flies around again, sees another one of these flowers, attacks it again, and pollen is transferred. In Asia, there are very large groups of orchids, and two of the largest groups are the Dendrobium and the Bulbophyllum. And I will talk about the Dendrobium first. Here is a Dendrobium, pretty much standard of what you can find a lot of times presented in grocery stores and restaurants as decorations. Classic Dendrobium. And this flower has developed a small spur at the back of its flower, and it presents a nectar reward to an insect. In this case, it would be a bee. So the bee comes in, look at these markings, guides the bee directly to the center of this flower. There's a supposed reward in there, and while the bee is burrowing down into this flower, the pollen right here is detached. See, the lip opens a little bit to accommodate the bee. Pollen is detached, sticks to the bee's head or back, visits the next flower, and hopefully the pollen will stick to the next flower and pollination occurs. Dendrobium is a large group with about 1,800 species in Asia. Here's another one. This is Dendrobium darei, and you can see in this Dendrobium the nectar spur at the back of the flower is even more pronounced. And this orchid occurs primarily around Papua New Guinea. A very curious group of dendrobiums are called the antelope dendrobiums. These also occur in New Guinea, some parts of Australia. Look at this. Not only do they have all of these lines and markings to guide their pollinator, they have these very curiously twisted petals. And actually, nobody knows why. This is something that would be a good research subject. Why have they developed these upright, twisted petals? It has got to have something to do with attracting a pollinator, but no one has been able to discover exactly what that is. Dendrobium tangerinum. Again, they really are a gorgeous group of orchids. One of my favorites, but of course I have a lot of favorites. I think the orchid that most people are familiar with are the moth orchids or the Phalaenopsis. These are the orchids that you can buy for as little as $10 or $12 in the grocery store or at a garden center. And this is one right here, Phalaenopsis or moth orchid. The interesting adaptation for this orchid, which comes from Asia, on the lip you see these two little spurs, and some of them are even more pronounced like hooks. This is actually, to simplify, it's a handlebar for the bee to hold on to while it's digging into the flower. It hangs onto these two little spurs because the flower is bouncing around, so it gives the bee something to hold on to while it's digging into the flower and transferring pollen. Now in nature, most Phalaenopsis don't look like this. Phalaenopsis species are more likely to look like something like this, a lot smaller, a lot more delicate. And you don't normally see these, but here at the Kaplan Orchid Conservatory, we're able to bring these so that everyone can enjoy the diversity of all of the orchid species. Yeah, you won't see this one in the grocery store. The largest genus of orchids is called Bulbophyllum, and they are an Asian or an old world group of orchids. There are over currently 2,400 identified species of Bulbophyllum. And here are a few right here. This is a Bulbophyllum, and one of the interesting things is their little lips wiggle. And this is to help attract pollinators. And almost all of the Bulbophyllums stink. They smell really bad, like dung or rotting meat. This is because they are attracting a fly or a gnat pollinator. And sometimes these little lips will wiggle in order to help attract them, as well as this smell. And here's another Bulbophyllum, a little teeny tiny one. In fact, most orchids found in the tropics are very small. And this is Bulbophyllum barbigerum. And if you look, you see how the lips, they're hairy and they move. They just wiggle all over the place. And when this orchid was first discovered in the early 1700s, some even thought that it was a link between animal and plant, because the way these lips just move and wiggle constantly when they're out in the wild. But a very curious little thing. And it doesn't smell good either. Some people call it the hairy caveman because it smells so bad. This is another Bulbophyllum. It's in a group called Ceropetalum. And as you can see, flowers are presented on one spike in a circular shape. And they all attract pollinators. Their little column is down in there, and these attract very small gnats or flies as their pollinator. Similar but different. And you can see that this lip is extended way, way out, and it's extremely curious flower. But then most orchids are extremely curious, and this is what has fascinated people for generations. And to this day, there are still orchids being discovered. So we don't quite grasp the complete enormity of this plant family. Right now, approximately, as I said, about 30,000. There could be quite a few more out there that we have yet to discover. With the incredible diversity of the orchids and their habitats, they occupy specific niches. Sometimes a species will only occur in an extremely limited area, even in a mountain valley or on a certain ridge in a mountain range, and that's it. That's the only specimens you will find. Because of this specificity, they are largely critically endangered, primarily due to habitat loss, but also from orchid collectors who will go out, who are unscrupulous and will collect an entire population, rendering them extinct. So while we enjoy the beauty of orchids, we also need to be mindful that if you want to become an orchid collector and grow a lot of these different plants, you should only get your orchids from a reputable nursery that can guarantee that it's propagated them legally from seed or from plants that were obtained legally. It's extremely important. We don't want to lose this incredibly diverse group of plants because of our own carelessness or neglect. And thinking about this too, these orchids have specific pollinators. So if this orchid disappears, then the pollinator could disappear. And then perhaps what feeds on that pollinator could disappear. So you unleash a chain reaction just by eliminating one species of orchid. And of course, this holds true for all of nature. Everything is interconnected. Every species is important, even though we may not be able to realize it, it is. So if you lead to the destruction of one species, you could create, again, a chain reaction that could eliminate who knows how many species.